Hello everyone. I am in a new spot today, as you've probably noticed. You're probably going to end up with the full tour of my house by the time you stick around this stream for a few weeks because I do things all over my house, not just in the sewing room. So tonight we are going to be making some things. Um, my package has arrived. If you've been following along with the saga, I was waiting on all of my materials to show up, and some of them finally did. So yay! I get to work on things. So I'm going to be doing some resin casting for the first part. We'll see how long that takes, and if there's time left over for the stream afterwards, I will do some other stuff because I have a lot of tasks on my to-do list. I got organized somewhat this week, and I actually wrote out piece lists for my costumes. So I have all of my costume stuff now organized in different binders, which is really helpful because I had a huge pile of paperwork on my desk that was just stuff was getting lost in it. So I'm slowly working through them bit by bit, but I'm trying to make the prop bits now because I don't want to rush those. And I'm in some cases I'm going to be faster at sewing these things than actually making all the props. And some things like resin take time to cure. So we're going to start on those, and then I can build the rest of the costume as I have time. So full disclosure, I'm working with some materials I've never worked with, brands at least, and these have a little bit different mix time and cure time than what I'm used to working with. So these are not going to be done tonight. This stuff it says it takes 24 to 48 hours to cure, which the epoxy resin I usually use is 14 to 16, so it's slightly different, but I mean, it can just sit on my table overnight. That's fine. I'm not going to be doing anything with it, and then you can see what it looks like next week. Um, so for years, I've been casting resin jewels, and wait a minute, no sound. Sound? I checked this twice. This is so not fair. How about now? Is there sound now? Any sound? Sound. It says I'm on. It says it's using this microphone. Okay, apparently some people can hear me. So I checked the input twice to make sure it was working before I hit go live. I don't know what's going on with my mic. It just periodically turns itself off or something. I don't know. It's all in my streaming software because I use this headset all the time. But I'm glad that somebody can hear me, so yay. And oh, good. I've got at least 3 people who can hear me now. All right, so hi. We're in the kitchen today. Brief recap. You're going to get the full tour of my house all the way around by the time we're done with this because I work in every room of my house. There is no room of the house safe from cosplay. We're down here because I have slightly better protective equipment able to be set up here. There's no carpet in this room, for example. Also, I'm really close to a sink, and so that's just going to work out better for doing things and cleaning up and all of that. So we're doing resin casting today because my package has finally arrived. Yay! And I have the resin I usually use, which is a different brand of epoxy resin. I actually still have a couple of bottles of it, but it's a couple years old. And epoxy resin typically has a maximum 1 year shelf life. The stuff in the basement has been stored in optimal condition, so it might still be good, but I didn't want to find out the hard way that it wasn't. So I ordered new resin, and this is a totally different brand that I've not worked with before because I couldn't find a supplier for the one I usually used. And this stuff takes 24 to 48 hours to cure, unlike the 14 to 16 hours I'm used to working with. So the good news is it has a really long pot life. It's not going to start hardening before I get it poured in the mold. Not that that was really a risk because the brand I normally use also has a really long pot life. But these are not going to be done tonight. These are going to be done sometime in the next couple of days, and we'll see what they look like on the next stream next week. So I am doing some simple gem casting to start with. And for years I have been doing, I've been making my old molds. And so I did jewelry work in college with real jewelry, and then after I got into cosplay, I started making resin stuff. But in order to make graduated sizes of various like cabochons and ovals and other things that I needed, I would go to the dollar store and buy the most awkwardly repetitive measuring spoons I could find. Some of them were ovals, some of them were little hemispheres, some of them were deeper hemispheres. And I have all of these things are molds that I've used previously. This was a baseball nightlight that I needed a big chest jewel for, I think, one of our Slayers costumes. And these work very well, especially the little ovals. It's really hard to find these if you're trying to buy acrylic gems, but they're really difficult to prepare properly and get the gems out of because they're hard plastic. And you can flex them a little bit, and if you prepare them with a release agent, they can kind of work. But after 18 years or whatever, I figured I could justify spending $6 on an actual silicone mold. So I have now bought myself, for the first time, a silicone resin mold that is easy to get the gems out of. So there, if I'd spent that $6 20 years ago, I would have been in very good shape. So I'm doing a bunch of circles for the Blastion Flens chest, which is a round thing with a bunch of round things in it. Technical terms, round things. And so they're all 8 of them are one size, and then the center one is larger. So I got this tray because it actually has a bunch of different sizes of the little hemispheres, and it already has grit stuck in the silicone. That's off to a great start. I found dog hair on this. Thanks, Sparkles. And it sticks, of course, because it's silicone and it's tacky. Anyway, this one actually has 8 of the right size that I need to cast. So I should be able to do this all in one go if all of my pigments cooperate and if all of my resin cooperates. Oh yeah, Laura, you're right. I don't think they were as readily available. I mean, you could still get them. The silicone molds, you could buy them from certain suppliers, but now you can walk into any craft shop and buy them, or you can order them online. They even sell them for hot glue now. It's ridiculous. All this stuff that we didn't have when we started, when we had to walk uphill in our cosplays both ways, through the snow in the middle of summer. Um, Anyway, so I have the cabochons for Flen, and then I also have some little frou-frou. This is actually a fondant mold for cake making, but I'm going to try to do it with resin because I need to make a piece of belt for, actually several pieces of belt for my Li Tianjin costume, and I'm going to try to make a composite resin mold of several different parts that I'm casting out of several different things to get the right design, and then cast the entire thing, make a silicone mold so that I can make about 20 repeating shapes of the same thing to go all the way around the belt. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm trying this with another silicone mold. So the good news is it's silicone, so if anything goes horribly wrong, it's easy to pop the resin out. So first things first, when you're working with resin, protect your workspace, protect yourself. I've got plastic down on my table because I don't want my kitchen table permanently resined. And I have an apron to protect my clothes. I'm going to go mute so I don't hit the mic. You get bonus points if your apron is an old 1970s model with a recipe for beef stew on it. There, if I want to cook, I can now make beef stew based on my apron. Don't wear your very, very favorite clothes for this either, just in case. I mean, no matter how careful you are, something can always drip or spill, so just use caution. Protect your stuff. And I have my resin molds on a sheet of cardstock, actually. That's so I can slide them around so I can still work on the table. Because once you've poured your resin into your mold, you do not want to pick that mold up. These are flexible. If I pick up this mold, no matter how I try to support it, it's going to flex and the resin's probably going to overflow and spill. At the very least, it could screw up my mold. At worst, it could actually make a huge mess all over my table. So I have plastic on the table, I have cardstock, and once this is cast, I can just slide it out of the way and give myself a workspace here. So it also helps to plan ahead. I wish I could say I was smart enough to have thought of this when I, just on my own because I was planning ahead. But actually, many years of casting things in the middle of my kitchen counter and then realizing I can't make dinner has actually taught me to think ahead. My old house was kind of a disaster. I had resin all over everything. Those countertops were never going to be the same. So I learned to protect my stuff. All right, so I have here little graduated measuring cups, which are really useful. This most epoxy resins that you buy, there are different types, but most of the ones you buy for jewelry type casting are 1-to-1 mixtures, which means you're using by volume the exact same amount of part A and part B and mixing them together. There are some resins, particularly polyester resins, where you have resin and then you have a catalyst agent that you put in by a certain number of drops per thickness of the cast. It's much more difficult to measure accurately, and they're much more annoying to use. They're also a lot more toxic. Urethane resins, sometimes you're measuring by weight rather than by volume. I really like measuring by volume because I always have measuring cups lying around and I don't always have a gram scale lying around. So I've got these, and then I've got paper cups that are disposable for mixing the actual resin in. The uncured resin, parts A and B, you can clean out of these with acetone. The cured resin, or rather the activated resin after you've mixed those parts, those are really hard to clean out. So we just dispose these cups. So I have paper for that. Smooth-sided. If you are doing any resin casting, I recommend having a smooth-sided cup, because if you have the plastic kind, like a solo cup type that has ridges down the sides, those little ridges can actually get bits of resin trapped in them and they won't mix completely. So I prefer smooth paper cups as much as possible. I have popsicle sticks, craft sticks, tongue depressors, whatever you want to call them. They're little wooden sticks. These are also disposable. These are for mixing and scraping the resin out of the containers. I have acetone for cleanup. I have a box of 15 colors. You can tell this is high tech because they misspelled the word colors on the lid. These are off-brand. I have epoxy pigments to tint the resin, and that should get us started. Oh, I also have, sadly, I can't find my actual box of fitted gloves. I have like surgical gloves, which work a lot better for protecting my hands and give me a lot better dexterity. But that box has gone missing during pandemic land at some point. And so I have these horrible food service gloves, which are better than nothing, I guess, but they're really annoying and they make a horrible rustly noise, and hopefully that's not picking up on the mic too much. So, very important, keep your parts A and B designated. If you actually are measuring into cups that you're not going to reuse instead of the reusable measuring cups, I recommend writing on them with a Sharpie, part A, part B, or writing on your paper cups so that you can actually keep them separated. I'm just going to divide them by my right and left sides, but you don't want to accidentally contaminate parts A or B by recycling or reusing the cups with the wrong one. Get your nose out of the trash. Yes, I see you. Sparkles was doing a bad thing. To be fair, I did tie up a bag of kitchen trash that had food scraps in it and put it by the door to go out, but she was investigating a little too closely. Now that I'm downstairs, Sparkles gets to make the rounds, as I see that you're seeing. Sparkles heard a crinkle. These are very crinkly, yes. Sorry, I'm catching up on the chat while I'm doing this. Yeah, so Sparkles is a pit bull. Pit bulls are actually not large dogs. They're supposed to be around 35, 40 pounds, like a nice, compact, medium-sized dog. People breed them to be too big. People crossbreed them. You know, as with any popular breed, you get a lot of variation. Sparkles, though, does have a shrink feature where if you have 3 people sitting on a couch and there are 4 inches of space between 2 of the people, she can compress to fit into that 4 inches. She will do it. She will find a way. So she doesn't have a lot of body mass, and she compresses very, very tiny. So, don't look pathetic at me. You're the one sniffing the trash. She's glaring at me from the hallway. Alright, so I'm going to start by measuring these out. Oh, hey, these are new. I have not opened them. I wonder if I can get this open. I may have to stab this with something. Give me a second. Alright, I've made myself a pour spout and an air hole in that one. It works somewhat better if you can take the entire foil thing off, but I don't want to get my hands messy before I actually start on this. Alright, and I'm pouring flat on a surface so that I don't end up tilting this. Oh, wow, this is extremely viscous. Oh my gosh. This is not the same consistency I'm used to. Alright, that is 7.5 milliliters of that one. I'm going to wipe this off so it doesn't glue the lid on when I'm done. Anytime you're not actively pouring out of one of your containers, you want to put the lids back on because exposure to air will make these go bad faster. Alright, that is part B. Part B. It doesn't matter which one you do first as long as you do both of them. And part A, which may... Oh, yep, this one's a lot less viscous. and these cups are staticky enough to pull the stream off to the side. Nope, nope, don't make a mess. Make sure the threads of the bottle are clean before you screw the cap back on. Otherwise, you will never open that bottle again. Or sometimes you try and the bottle explodes in your hand, which I've also had happen. Not often, but the plastic can get fatigued. Okay, there's part A. Now, if I put these next to each other, they should be, yes they are, the same depth. Because you want the same amount of A and B by volume. Alright, now wait a minute. This is, let me double check which color am I doing first? I'm doing yellow first. Alright, so I have two colors of yellow, and I'm not sure which one I actually want. So I might just use both. I've never used these before. Let me just mix them and see what happens. If you're using pigments for clear epoxy resin, shake them really, really well first. I learned the hard way that if you don't shake them thoroughly enough, the color will actually fade after a few weeks. And I had a really beautiful set of jewelry pieces I made for one costume some years ago, and they were bright red, primary red. And a month later, I pulled the costume out to wear it, and they were clear. And I wrote to the company, and they're like, yeah, that's what happens if you don't mix them. They were a lot less nice about it than that. They basically said, it's your own fault. You should have known. It didn't say to shake them in the directions, but anyway. Okay, so I'm going to put one drop of each of these in, and then mix and see what happens. I'm going to attempt to get a drop in. Hello? Wow, it would be really great if this dye would actually come out of the bottle. I may be using the other color. Alright, I'm going to get a pin and attempt to open these up. They have a hole at the end, but I think it may have dried shut. So let me see what I can do with this. Fortunately, I have a bulletin board. Alright, that one is definitely now open. And this one... Oh! That one's definitely now open. Check. That one got a little messy. Okay, let's try this again. Ah, that's better. Let's see what happens when I mix these. I'm only putting the dye in 1/2 for start. That's for a couple of reasons. One, it's a good idea to be in the habit of doing that so that if you're working with something that has a very short pot life, which is the amount of time you have before it starts to harden, you don't want to mix A and B together and then start adding your colors and try to get your colors mixed in before your material starts setting up. The other reason is it actually can help you see when you've properly mixed parts A and B and are ready to pour them. So, generic crafting things you can use for pigments, do they have to be resin specific? They need to be resin specific if they are liquid. Resin, especially with oil and water-based things, resin pigments need to be non-reactive with the resin. If you put anything water-based at all in resin, it will prevent the resin from curing chemically. So they need to be resin pigments. If you are putting inclusions in, like you want to put glitter in, you want to put metal powder in, you want to put you want to thicken it by putting in some wheat flour or something. You can use dry things, and most of them, as long as they're not going to be a chemical that reacts with the resin, most of those will be fine. But you definitely only want to use liquid pigments that are specifically made for the type of resin you are working with. So epoxy resin uses different formulas than urethane resin, for example. So you have to know what your product is. All right, that's... Which one of these is golden yellow? That is golden yellow. Let's put in some more golden yellow. because I think I like that a little better than the bright yellow, although it's not getting much darker. Fine, we'll put in both of them, see what happens. Alright, so this is fairly yellow now. I actually want it to be pretty darn yellow because it's going to be a centerpiece and I want the color to show, so I'll add one more drop. Now, because this is a very thick material, I'm getting a lot of air bubbles trapped in here, so that's something I'm going to have to be careful of when I pour it, that I don't get bubbles trapped in the mixture. So I'm going to set that down for a second and just let it sit to let the bubbles rise up out of it. You will always have some bubbles come in with mixing. There are a few things you can do to get rid of them. I've got a heat gun here, which I will be using over the surface to keep any from forming on the back. Having a pressure chamber, like a vacuum chamber, can help with that too. Which I don't own one, so that doesn't help. Having a vibrating platform, which I do own, but it's too big for, it vibrates too much for the amount that I'm using here. It would be for like mixing a large thing. There are lots of little things you can do, but also just letting it sit for a second so the air bubbles come to the top is probably the easiest one. So let me, while that's debubbling, let me double check and make sure that I know which of these cavities I'm using. See, that was that's that one, yeah, and that's that one, okay. So don't cast the wrong size. Okay, now I suspect that I will have a little bit of resin left over after I pour this. I've measured it fairly close, but I think I might end up with a little extra, which is fine actually, because I'll just put the overflow in here. Anytime you're casting resin and you don't have an exact measurement of how much you're going to be using for the cavity, it's a good idea to have something to pour that resin into, whether that's another mold or just a disposal cup or something, because you don't want resin just sitting there and hardening in whatever you're using. I mean, you can leave it in the cup, but if you have another mold, it's an easy way to cast something in your other mold. All right, so that has debubbled a bit. So we are going to now pour both parts A and B into a neutral third cup. Since A and B will both have a little bit of residue stay in those containers, that's the only way to guarantee that you're still getting the same volume is by putting both of them into a third cup as opposed to pouring A into B's cup. So I will start with the colored one, and as soon as I pour this, because this has such a long pot life and I'm not worried about it setting up right away, I'm going to use acetone and clean out these containers so I can reuse them for the other one. And then I don't have to get new measuring cups out. Uncured resin cleans really well with acetone. Cured resin, not so much. I mean, you can gradually dissolve it over time, but you can't just wipe it down. So I'm scraping all the sides and bottom of that. How long is the pot life on this resin? 30 to 40 minutes on this one, according to the bottle. So I've got time to wipe out the containers with acetone. And again, the pot life is how long you have to work with it before you have to pour it, before it becomes unusable. And some materials have a 2-minute pot life, and some materials have an hour pot life, and it just depends on what you're working with and what the formula is. There's many, many different types. And I really hope this resin ends up being a good one because, as I said, it's a brand I've never worked with before. Okay, so I've got some acetone. I usually buy the big, huge containers of acetone, like industrial paint thinner acetone, which is the exact same stuff as this nail polish remover. It's just that my industrial paint thinner acetone is at Laura's house right now. And this was in my bathroom closet, so this is what we're using. I like cotton balls. They're a little easier to clean than with like paper towels or something. So I usually just pour some acetone in, like you just saw, and then soak it up with a cotton ball as I rub it around, getting down in all the creases and the corners. And then I will rinse this after I'm done. At least with the colored one, it's really obvious when I've got everything. And I do have a trash can next to me. I'm not just chucking stuff on my floor. Do not pour acetone on your kitchen linoleum or vinyl or whatever it is you have in your kitchen. All right, so there's those two. And now I'm going to go ahead and mix these. So part A and part B went into this cup. When you mix, you want to scrape the sides and bottom of the container thoroughly so you don't end up with any unmixed residue. And this is a really viscous one, so I'm going to end up with air bubbles that I'm going to have to let sit for a minute to come out, which is fine. Mixing time kind of depends on the viscosity and how much material. Something this small I could probably mix for 30 seconds to a minute and be okay. Larger quantities you'd want to mix for a couple of minutes minimum. Yes, it is a long pot life. Which, I mean, for epoxy resins, it's not terribly uncommon. I think the one I normally work with is probably 20 to 30 minutes, but but it also takes 14 to 16 hours to cure, as opposed to the opaque resins that we use. You have like a 3 or 4 minute pot life, and then the entire thing's cured in 15 minutes. I mean, full curing goes on for a week afterwards with any resin. It doesn't entirely cure, but it gets to the point where it's set up and it's safe to demold at that point. I tend to leave mine in the molds a little longer unless I'm running on an extremely short turnaround. All right, while that is debubbling, I'm going to go rinse these out so they have a chance to dry. Because again, water and resin don't mix, and I want these completely dry before I pour the second part. This is another reason I wanted to be near a sink, preferably a sink that's easy to clean, unlike the bathroom sink. Okay, we're going to let these dry for a bit. There is a dog hair in my resin. Seriously? Did you have to? Life with pets. All right, let me see if I can get the dog hair up. I got it. Dog hair free. I'll use that one to mix the next thing. Yes, you can always tell the pet people. They're like, "Oh, yep, cat hair on my fabric, dog hair on my whatever." All right, this is largely debubbled. There's still a few surface bubbles, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and pour it. The nice thing about paper cups as opposed to plastic is you can squeeze them and make yourself a pour spout because they auto crease. So I'm going to start by pouring a very thin stream, the thinnest stream I can get, into the bottom of the mold. You don't want to pour from the top down. If you've got a multi-level mold, like let's say you have a mold that has a relief design in it, you don't want to pour over the highest part of the mold and let it flow down. You want to start pouring at the lowest point and let it fill from the bottom up so you don't trap more air bubbles underneath it. That is just about perfect. Maybe one more drop. If you're doing something round, if you think back to your high school chemistry class, or higher than high school if you took college chemistry, there's such a thing as a meniscus, which is if you look at a glass of water, there's a curve to the surface of the glass of water. That happens in resin too. And if you're doing something like a flat back gem, you don't want to leave that curve. You want to fill it just enough that it levels itself out, because otherwise it's hard to put a backing on the gem. Which just means adding 1 or 2 more drops. It's not enough to get the edges up. You want to get the the middle up to that same level. And the surface tension of the resin will hold it flat if you get it up to the right height. That looks pretty good. Man, this stuff is super slow to pour, which makes it easy to get one drop at a time. Okay, that one's good. So I'm going to just pour this into this other mold since I have extra. I don't want to overfill that one. Oh, I just made a mess. Cool. It's fine. Man, this mold is very finicky. This stuff does not want to go into the cavity. It's not a great mold design either, but it was cheap, and it had more or less the shape I was going for, so eh. Alright, that's sort of kind of close-ish. And since these pieces are only going to be used for additional mold making, I don't care if they're all one color. So if I don't have enough resin of one color, I'll just do the other batch and it'll be fine. But I think I'll actually have enough of this one. It'll be ugly because the mold is not filling very nicely, but that's what Dremels are for. I can just grind down the ugly part. Alright. Close enough. This one doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to exist. I'm going to go ahead and scrape the last little bit into here just to dispose of it so I don't have a lot of liquid resin lying around. Now, all the liquid resin that is mixed that's still clinging to the sides of this cup, I'm just going to leave it in this cup to cure on its own. And then once it's completely cured, I will dispose of it once it's hard. You never want to pour liquid uncured or liquid mixed resin into the trash because resin curing is an exothermic reaction, and it will melt through your trash bag and fuse itself to the side of your trash can. You will never get that can back. Alright, so that's good. That's ugly, but it's fine. Now I've got a heat gun, and I'm going to pass the heat gun on low over the surface just a few times to debubble it. That is not low. Let's try low. Wow, there are a lot of little tiny, tiny bubbles way down in there. Hopefully they'll rise to the surface of the next, what did I say this was, 24-hour cure time? As a reminder, if you have a heat gun, always have a trivet to put the heat gun on so you don't melt through your surfaces. Alright, so that is the first color down. What brand of heat gun? Looks like a Ferrari compared to mine. No, not a Ferrari. Not even a Volkswagen. This is Drill Master. This is a $14 Harbor Freight off-brand heat gun. $14. If you use a coupon, you can get it for cheaper than that. These are the ones we use for our workshops. And I actually have bought nicer heat guns in the past. I bought like a $35 nice computerized one once, hated it, took it back to the store 2 days later because it had a programmed cooldown time. So you couldn't just turn it on and off. You would turn it off and then it would go through its cooldown cycle and you would be sitting there holding your heat gun for another 45 seconds, unable to work on your materials because you couldn't do anything with the heat gun that was still running. So cheap is better in some cases. I've gone through... I've probably bought 12 of these because we have a bunch. I use a couple in my house. We've got a bunch for our workshops. We did have somebody glue something to the end of one by accident, and then we had to replace that one. So I've bought a lot of them. But, I mean, it's hard to go wrong for 14 bucks. It has two speeds. Low is up, high is down. That's it. It doesn't have a thermostat, doesn't have any of that stuff. Yep. If you go to Harbor Freight, definitely take coupons. You can find them online. You can usually get 20% off. So, yeah, Laura says she's got a bunch in the workshop boxes too. The only actual name brand one I have is I do have one Black& Decker heat gun, which is very similar to this one. It's just a slightly different handle shape. They all work the same. It's not really a big difference. But I'm a fan of saving money, especially if I'm buying a bunch of something for a workshop. Okay, so I think that one's about as good as I can get it without actually having a degassing chamber, which I don't. There is another dog hair. Oh my gosh. Oh, dog. All right, I don't know if I can get this out easily. I'm going to get a toothpick. It'll be more precision. The good news is this has such a long cure time that if I poke something into it at this stage, it's really not going to matter. All right, I know I have toothpicks. Where'd they go? There's one. This is actually a cocktail toothpick, but it's fine. It's just prettier than usual. Okay. How do I get dog hair? And it's just floating around my house. Sparkles everywhere. You're as bad as your name. You sound like glitter. Oh no, this one doesn't want to come out. Nope, nope. There we go. I got it. Okay. All right, no more dog hairs allowed. Of course, immediately the cocktail pick starts shedding everywhere. I've got red cellophane. All right, let me check. Those do not have dog hair. Those do not have... Nope, nope, that one has dog hair. I've only had this sitting on my kitchen table. The dog hasn't been anywhere near it. It's just in the atmosphere now. All right, it looks like all the other cavities are clear of dog hair, but I'm keeping the toothpick just in case. Sparkles doesn't shed when it's warm. Sparkles sheds because she's terrified of air and she blows her coat at the smallest, slightest provocation. Sparkles has some fear issues, like a lot of them. Okay, let me check and make sure these are completely dry. That one looks completely dry. Are you dry? Yes, it feels dry. Are you dry? Yes, you feel dry too. Okay, time for round 2. So I'm done with the yellow. I'm going to set those over there so I don't mix them up with the orange. This is the orange, which is what all the other ones are. And it occurs to me I will probably have to poke this one open as well. Where'd my pin go? There's my pin. I cannot do this with a glove on. Oh. This is why we cover our workspace, because that just exploded. It's fine, it's only on the paper. Didn't even get the plastic. Okay. Now, we do the exact same thing, except this time I'm going to need more. Sorry about that. I just bumped the microphone with my glove. And there we go. Once again, cleaning the bottle so I don't glue it shut. I love how this bottle advertises self-leveling as a feature. Like, technically, yes, but we call that gravity. Alright, you can stop dripping any day now. There. I really should have put those napkins right within reach, as opposed to getting up every single time. Okay. If I need to cast resin on the moon. I'm not sure how that would work. The lack of atmosphere and the cold of deep space might be a problem, actually. Resin does need heat to cure. That's how it works. I haven't actually decided how I'm going to back these. Normally I do aluminum backing, so they end up with a mirror backing, which makes them nice and shiny, and the color shows up really well. But in the source material, it doesn't really look like these have a mirror backing, but I'm worried, since they're going to go on a black background, that if I don't mirror back them, the colors won't show at all, because black doesn't bounce any light through them. So I might have to figure out some sort of less shiny mirror back. But that's a problem I can play with once I actually have gems to set things on, or set on things rather, and see what color they look like. Okay. That looks pretty well mixed. Orange is not my favorite color, especially that shade of orange. Must resist urge to make morbid like a joke to riff off dog hair in space. Oh. You know when you're a kid and people tell you things and you believe them, and then you get older and you realize they were lying to you, and then they're like, yep, and then they euthanized her. And I'm like, that's not exactly what they did, though. Poor Leica. Okay. So that is actually not terribly bubbly, so that's fine. So I'm ready to start putting these into the same cup. There's a lot more of this one, which means we're going to be mixing a little bit longer. All right, there's part A, and here is part B. Now, the greater volume of resin you have in one spot, the faster it'll start heating up and curing. And that's because the way resin works is parts A and B cause a chemical reaction that causes the material to heat up and cure, and the more material you have to have a chemical reaction, the more heat you get. So if you are casting a really thick section of something, like you're casting a really deep reservoir, it's going to cure a lot faster than if you're casting a really thin, uh, shallow mold across a wide area, which is something to keep in mind also based on your ambient temperature. If you're working, let's say you're working in your garage and it's 50 degrees, thin sections may not even cure because there's just not going to be enough heat generated to compensate for the fact that the air temperature is that cold. Now you can cheat with this a little bit by putting it in a warm environment. So if you have a very low temperature oven, or you can heat up a space that it's in, it'll cure a little bit better and a little bit faster. I have actually been known to stick resin into a low temperature oven to cure it more quickly, like, if it's the night before the con and I didn't make something on time and I'm desperately trying to get something done so I can wear it the next day, and my resin has a 16-hour cure time and I have to wear it in 12 hours. Not that I would ever do that. I totally did that. That was Gen Con a few years ago. But you can actually heat up the surrounding temperature and make your resin cure a little bit faster, just so it doesn't have to compensate with a lower air temperature. Dehydrated resin jerky. I've got my dehydrator running behind me right now. That would, if I didn't want to destroy my really nice new dehydrator, I might could put resin in that. But I mean, it's about the right temperature. I think that model goes up to like 185 or something maximum. I just got a food dehydrator a few weeks ago and I've been making all the things. Tons of snacks. Okay. We are going to let that debubble for a second because it's full of bubbles. And I'm going to clean out my cups while I wait. The acetone works really well as long as you're not using measuring cups that will dissolve in acetone. So do be aware, some materials, really cheap plastics and things, are not actually a good candidate for this. But I have been known to save graduated measuring cups from everything from cough syrup bottles to laundry detergent lids, anything I can measure with, because then I can always have some handy and I don't have to keep buying little disposable ones. I wish there were a good paper option, but it's hard to do non-transparent measuring cups with graduation on the sides that you can read. Because I prefer to use paper instead of plastic for a lot of things, just for environmental reasons and for plastic production reasons. But that's not always useful. Got a little too much acetone in that one. But if you keep cleaning out the cups, you can use these mostly indefinitely. I mean, eventually they do start showing wear and the plastic can age and crack because they're not meant to be really long term. They are actually meant to be disposable. I just don't like to throw them out. Okay. Yeah. And now there is a slight resiny residue on my fingers from cleaning those out because I was not wearing my gloves. Bad demo. Acetone is at least skin safe in small quantities because nail polish remover kind of has to be. I mean, you don't want to leave your hands in it soaking, but if you just wipe your hands down, it's fine. Okay. Looks like a lot of the bubbles are coming up to the surface in that, so all right, I'm going to start pouring this into more cavities. Oh, these are very small cavities. I may have mixed a little too much resin. I don't normally cast things this shallow. No, that was too much. That was way too much. All right. We're just going to scrape that off into another area. So the resin poured a little too fast and overflowed the mold, so I'm just using the stick to scrape it into the next mold cavity, which is not pretty and means I will have some trimming to do, but that's not insurmountable. At least with this being a silicone mold, it should be fairly easy to remove any excess resin. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think that is all of them. Cool. I'm just going to pour the rest into this other mold over here. And yeah, I mixed about twice as much as I actually needed. Good job, me. Oh well. All right, and that's just going to sit over there and cure. And I'm going to attempt to wipe up some of the stuff on the edge so I don't get my hands in it. Have you tried the silicone resin measuring cups? I have not, mostly because I've been, as you see, like scavenging things like measuring spoons, and I don't tend to buy a lot of things that are purpose made. Um, but if I were going to be doing a whole lot of really, resin casting that was necessary to be able to clean out completely and reuse very quickly, that might be an option. Basically, I'm inherently cheap, and whenever possible, I will recycle rather than buying new stuff. Yeah, I just made a huge mess over here. Cool. It's fine. This was just an overflow mold anyway. It'll all come off. Just going to make sure that actually stays on the mold, though. Okay. So, I'm going to make sure these are all closed up tightly. And I'm going to put my 15 couleurs back in the box so my pigments aren't lying around. There's actually some really nice colors in here. My other resin pigments were getting really old and not coloring reliably. Sometimes they wouldn't come out very well, but I mean, there's a decent color range in this box. And it was cheap, and again, inherently cheap. Who cares about spelling if it's cheap? Okay, so let me quick check for dog hair. Okay, I don't see any dog hair. I'm going to use the heat gun and get bubbles off the top again. Odd question from Resin Newbie. I'm looking at painting a resin cast. Primer recommendations. That's going to partly depend on what kind of resin you're using. And there are plastic paints. They typically are made for models, like people who make model cars, model trains, that sort of thing, that work pretty well on resin because they're designed to do that. Um, as far as primer, I don't typically prime mine. I frequently I don't paint resin because I'm actually cold casting it. So I put a metallic powder or a pigment in it when I cast it. Um, but I would assume that any plastic specific primer, like I know Krylon makes a plastic spray paint and some of the others, as long as it's made for use on plastic specifically, it should be okay with most resins. Um, there are, of course, going to be slightly different types of plastic. If you're using like polyester versus urethane versus epoxy resins, are all going to have slightly different properties, but most plastic paints will work on at least polyester and epoxy. I don't think I've ever painted urethane resin myself. I'm sure it's been done. Um, you could check. I mean, there are lots and lots and lots of resources out there. Smooth On has a lot of great tutorials. They would probably have an FAQ on their site that would answer some questions about painting it, depending on which variety you were uh, going to be casting with. Because Smooth On makes all different types of resin, so they should be able to answer questions about any variety. I'm adding a couple drops because once the bubbles popped, the levels on these dropped just a little, and I was starting to get some of that meniscus back. If I can see a curve in the surface, it means it's not going to be totally flush, and it's going to be hard to back and glue down. So that's why I'm adding a few drops. The bubbles do take up some volume, so it's always good to check after you pop them. Come on. There. There's enough resin left in this cup. I'm just going to add some to these other cavities. Not that I particularly need orange gems in these sizes, but if I cast them in the silicone mold, then it's not going to overheat and risk bursting the seams of this paper cup and making a huge mess. So I'll just put some in here. It's fine. Does anybody else have any questions while I'm doing this exciting task of pouring resin into silicone cavities? Man, I wish I'd had this mold a couple years ago. I'm just looking at all these things. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when I had to cobble something together for that shape. Yeah, this would have been really great when I did that huge Sailor Moon group and had to make custom gems for everybody. Okay, all of that looks fairly level now. So I am going to leave these cups to cure. I don't think I need the toothpick. It doesn't look like Sparkles has invaded any of these, so that's good. I'll put the push pin back in the bulletin board where it belongs. And I am done with the gloves, so I can dispose of those. I really hate those food service gloves. I'm just going to slide this out of the way carefully so I have a space that is not covered in resin right in front of my chair. It's a good idea to always wash your hands after working with chemicals. Of course, mine also have acetone on them because I just wiped them down. I feel like I'm doing a cooking show. I have a camera pointed at my kitchen. I mean, it is chemistry. It's just not edible chemistry, so they're related. So that resin's going to sit in the mold for the next 24 hours-ish, and hopefully it will cure nicely and I won't have to redo any of them. But it actually looks like it debubbled fairly well. There's a few stray bubbles down in there that'll probably rise to the top as it cures, so that should be fine. At Gen Con some years ago, you talked about making resin gems and how the fumes were very toxic. Okay, the answer is yes. Resin does give off toxic fumes. I have fans running around here. There's a fan over there. I've got my HVAC running, pushing air around the room, and there's actually really good circulation through this area. So I do have a fair amount of ventilation here. It is cold enough outside, like, is it? I don't know if it might not be late enough to actually be in single digits, but it is well below freezing, which means I can't actually have the windows open right now. Otherwise, I would have the windows open and I would have fans pulling fresh air in from outside. But because of the amount of air I have circulating and the fact that I do have a couple of fans running, there is air moving through the house. And it's enough volume of air that I'm not getting a lot of fumes coming off of this. The other factor here is I'm using epoxy resin. Part of the reason I'm using epoxy resin is because I'm doing it indoors. I would not be casting polyester resin in my kitchen. It off gases really badly. It has really bad fumes, and they stay for days and days. So epoxy resin is slightly less bad. If I get really close to it, I can smell it, but that's putting my head directly over it. And with the amount of air I have moving through here, I'm not inhaling a lot of really strong fumes. So absolutely yes, do work in a ventilated area. This is another reason I'm in the kitchen, where my lower floor of my house is not a truly open floor plan, but it's kind of a circular floor plan. So my living room, my kitchen, my entryway, the hallway, all of that is one big space. So I've got a lot more airflow, whereas my upstairs sewing room has half of a room height ceiling and then it slopes down to the floor, and there's no forced air up there, so there's no ventilation really. So this is the best place in my house if I have to work indoors. This has the most circulation. I don't tend to do a lot of resin casting in my basement if I can help it, for the same reason, because it's just the same air circulating around that small workshop area. The best place to work is outdoors if you can manage it, but since outdoors is currently like 9 degrees, not a really good environment for casting resin for the heat reasons I said earlier. So right now I'm doing what I can to mitigate having fumes, but it's also I'm using a type of resin that is less bad. All resin does off gas though, so this is not something you want to be constantly sticking your nose into without a lot of preparation and protective equipment. For the small quantity I'm working with, the type of resin it is, and the amount of air I have moving, I'm actually okay with this. If I were working with polyester or urethane resin, it would not be in my house. I did that one time. I learned my lesson. Never again. So, so yeah, everything we're doing is toxic to some level. Don't lick this while it's curing. Don't stick your fingers in it while it's curing. There's a reason we are wearing aprons, and I was wearing gloves when I was handling the actual bottles. I have been doing this long enough that I'm pretty good about not getting resin on me, but every once in a while it still happens, so you do want to be careful. But yeah, just when in doubt, wear protective gear. It's a good bet. You have more brain cells that way. They don't get fried by chemicals. If you walk into a craft store like a Michael's or a Joann or a Hobby Lobby, and you just pick up a resin kit off the shelf, a lot of those kits are polyester resin, which is one of the reasons I'm really emphatic about it in my workshops, saying, hey, if you're just going to buy resin off the shelf and not do any research on it, don't do it in your living space, because the odds are good that it's polyester resin. I don't think I have ever seen a urethane resin casting kit in a craft store. I have occasionally seen epoxy resin kits. I think Cast and Craft, which is a brand that I think Michaels carries, they do make an epoxy resin one. But most of the ones that I've seen for clear gem casting, like this type of stuff in stores, tends to be polyester resin, and that you do not want to be breathing. And you will smell it forever. Like, it's just, your house is resin now. It's never going away. But just be prepared with that. I actually thought about opening the windows just to get a little extra fresh air in, but not with these temperatures, because that would be bad. It would not cure the resin. It would probably freeze me out of the house. But I have fans going, so I guess they're not picking up on them. I can hear them, but I'm in the room with them. But back there, there's a fan blowing. Any other questions? Let's see, what's our time? Oh, our time is actually after 9. Um, yeah, polyester and urethane are yeah, polyester smells the worst. Like if you walk into a room where polyester resin has been curing, it just smells like a horrible chemical factory. Urethane doesn't smell quite as bad, but still gives off some toxic fumes. Epoxy is the least offensive smell. And you know, I'm sitting in a room with it. I can smell that there is resin here, but it's not like bam chemicals to the face. So there are still some fumes. It's still something you don't want to be breathing for a long period in an enclosed area, but it's less bad than the other two. So, well, I was originally planning on working on some other part of the costume, but since it's after 9 now, I probably don't want to start that because it's going to take me a while to do those, so I can save those for a future time. Um, Next week, I am hoping to do a demo of my new laser cut applique technique, which I just finished last night. So I talked a couple weeks ago about the fact that I was going to try to laser cut some heat and bond applique for use on a costume, so that it would seal the edges of the applique by melting the material, and then I could just iron it straight on and not have to satin stitch it. And it worked. I mean, I haven't tried running it through a washer, so I don't know how well it worked, but so far it worked. I managed to cut it successfully, sear the edges, and iron it on, and it looks good. So hopefully next week I will have the rest of my designs done, because by far the longest time investment in that is doing the vectors of all of the designs I need to cut out. So I had to buy a bunch of different materials and test them and see what would work, and I figured out what fabric works, what masking works, what heat activated adhesive works, and I figured out the settings in the laser cutter. So now I just need to actually generate all the graphics to cut. So next week, hopefully, I will have those done and I can do a live laser cutting and then ironing on fabric demo. And if I can make that work consistently, then I could even do, like, people can send me the designs they want and I can prepare ready to go. It's basically the fabric equivalent of those vinyl decals that you stick on your laptops and notebooks and things. If I can make the transfer work, which I know people do that with the Silhouette and the Cricut machines doing the heat transfer vinyl, but you don't have to use vinyl for this. You can use fabric, so that gives you a lot more variety in what you can do and what you can make match the rest of your costumes. So I'm hoping that all works out well. But my demo last night worked. I managed to make some various little transfers in various little shapes, and then I managed to make one big one. So now I've got to make a few more big ones, but that'll be next week. And I also have a whole bunch of materials that just arrived. They get to sort through and figure out what I'm doing, and the wigs arrived, so I have some wig styling and ventilating to do. So lots of stuff on the docket for the next few weeks. So that's what's coming up. And as always, if you have any topics or questions and you're like, hey, I really want to see something about X, or I see this costume on your website, how'd you do it? Send those to me and I will happily do a session on them. So I will let everyone get on with their Tuesday night. I have not had dinner yet, so that's the next thing on my plan. So I hope you all have enjoyed watching me pour plastic into a silicone cavity, but maybe you learned something. If not, at least thanks for hanging out in the chat and keeping me company on a Tuesday night during the tail end of a, we hope, pandemic, when I can't actually see people in real life. So it's fun to hang out online. And I will see you all, hopefully, next Tuesday, same time, same Twitch stream channel. Bye, guys.